The Ruthless Billionaire CEO rejects all women but falls hard for his bold new maid. What happens when a man who's built walls so high that even birds won't fly over them meets the one woman brave enough to knock on the door? Sometimes the heart doesn't care about paychecks, job titles, or the 1,000 reasons why something should never work. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell me where you are watching from and time. Subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss future video uploads. Thank you. Now back to the story. What do you think makes someone completely shut their heart off to love? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. The thing about being ridiculously wealthy is that people stop seeing you as human. They see dollar signs, opportunities, and ways to climb ladders they've been staring at their whole lives. That's exactly what turned James Mitchell into the kind of man who could freeze hell over with just a look. At 34, James had everything money could buy and nothing money couldn't. His estate in the rolling hills of Virginia looked like something out of a fairy tale. The kind of place where presidents might vacation and movie stars might get married. But fairy tales were for people who still believed in happy endings, and James had given up on those a long time ago. "Sir, the new maid will be arriving this afternoon," his assistant Carol said over the phone as James stood in his home office, staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens where his staff was setting up for tonight's charity gala. Even his good deeds were calculated business moves. "Fine. Make sure she understands the rules. I don't want to see her, I don't want to hear her, and I certainly don't want her trying to start conversations like the last 3 did." James's voice could cut glass when he wanted it to. This is a job, not a social club. Carol had worked for him for 8 years. She'd seen him turn down supermodels, actresses, and daughters of other billionaires with the same cold efficiency he used to dismiss bad business deals. The man treated romance like a disease he was trying to avoid catching. "Of course, sir. Her name is Amara Johnson, and her references are impeccable. She comes highly recommended from the Thornfield estate." James barely grunted in response. Names were just sounds to him unless they could make him richer or cause him problems. He had no reason to think this Amara Johnson would be any different from the parade of women who'd worked in his house before. Quiet, efficient, and smart enough to stay invisible. If he'd known what was coming, he might have packed a bag and left town. 20 miles away, Amara Johnson was giving herself a pep talk in the cracked mirror of her tiny apartment bathroom. At 27, she'd cleaned enough rich people's houses to know the drill. Keep your head down, do your work, collect your paycheck, and don't get attached to the fancy stuff that'll never be yours. But this job was different. This job paid 3 times what she'd ever made before, and Lord knows she needed every penny. Her little brother Marcus was finally getting into college. The first person in their family to make it that far, and somebody had to help with those books and fees. "You got this, girl," she whispered to her reflection, adjusting the simple black dress and white apron that would become her uniform. "He's just another rich man who thinks his money makes him better than everybody else. You've dealt with worse." Except she hadn't really. The stories about James Mitchell weren't pretty. They called him the Ice King of Wall Street. Said he'd never been seen with the same woman twice, and most women didn't even get a first chance. His business rival once joked that James Mitchell's heart was so cold, it could freeze fire. Amara had grown up in the kind of neighborhood where you learned to spot trouble before it spotted you. But she'd also grown up in the kind of family where you did whatever it took to help the people you loved. If working for the coldest man in Virginia meant Marcus could become the doctor he'd dreamed of being since he was 10 years old, then she'd bring her own jacket to keep warm. The cab ride to the Mitchell estate felt like traveling to another planet. The houses got bigger, the lawns got greener, and the cars got shinier until finally they pulled up to gates that probably cost more than most people's homes. The driver whistled low under his breath. "You sure this is right, miss? This place looks like where royalty would live." Amara clutched her small suitcase tighter. "I'm sure." The gates opened like something out of a movie, and the driveway seemed to go on forever. When the house finally came into view, Amara had to remind herself to breathe. It wasn't just big. It was the kind of big that made you feel small just looking at it. 3 stories of cream-colored stone, with windows that sparkled like diamonds and gardens that looked like they'd been painted by angels. But it was the silence that struck her most. All that beauty, all that space, and it felt as empty as a church at midnight. Carol met her at the servants' entrance. Because of course there was a separate entrance for people like her. The older woman was perfectly polite and perfectly professional, which somehow made everything feel even more cold. Mr. Mitchell values his privacy above all else, Carol explained as she led Amara through hallways lined with paintings that probably cost more than Amara would make in a lifetime. He has very specific expectations, and meeting them is the only way to succeed in this position. They passed through rooms that looked like they belonged in museums, a library with more books than some towns had, a dining room with a table that could seat 20 people, a living room with ceilings so high you'd need binoculars to see the top. "Where is everyone?" Amara asked. The place felt like a beautiful tomb. Mr. Mitchell doesn't entertain often. Tonight's gala is unusual. It's for his late parents' charity foundation. The only reason he hosts it is because the board requires it. Carol's voice softened just a little. He lost them both in a car accident 5 years ago. Since then, he's become very focused on his work. That explained some things. Grief could turn people inside out, make them build walls so high they forgot how to find the doors. Amara had seen it before in her own neighborhood, when people lost everything and decided it was safer to feel nothing at all. "Your quarters are here," Carol said, opening a door to reveal a small but comfortable room with its own bathroom. It was nicer than any place Amara had ever lived. "Dinner is at 6, served in the staff dining room. You'll start your duties tomorrow morning at 7 sharp." As Carol left, Amara sat on the narrow bed and looked around her new home. Through the small window, she could see staff members setting up tables and stringing lights in the garden. In a few hours, this empty mansion would be full of people pretending to care about charity while they showed off their jewelry and made business deals over champagne. And somewhere in this beautiful, lonely house was a man who'd apparently forgotten how to be human. "Well, Marcus," she whispered, pulling out her phone to text her brother. "I hope you appreciate the adventure I'm going on for your education." She had no idea that the adventure was about to become the kind of story people write songs about. Have you ever had a moment where one look, one conversation, completely changed everything you thought you knew about someone? Tell me about it in the comments. I love hearing these stories. The charity gala was in full swing by 8 o'clock, and James Mitchell was doing what he did best, being present without actually being there. He moved through the crowd like a shark through water, smooth and dangerous, making the right conversations with the right people and writing the right checks to keep everyone happy. "James, you simply must meet Senator Williams' daughter. She's just back from studying art in Paris," gushed Mrs. Pemberton, a woman who'd made matchmaking her personal mission ever since her own daughter married a tech billionaire. "I'm sure she's lovely," James replied with the kind of smile that looked real from a distance but felt like winter up close. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on something." He'd been using that excuse all night. Check on the catering. Check on the music. Check on anything that got him away from the parade of eligible women being thrown in his direction like flowers at a wedding he never wanted to attend. The truth was, James felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. Everyone expected him to play the charming bachelor, the available billionaire, the prize catch. But all he wanted was for the evening to end so he could go back to his office and lose himself in spreadsheets and profit margins. Things that made sense, things that couldn't hurt him. He stepped out onto the garden terrace, breathing in the cool evening air. The party continued behind him, all laughter and clinking glasses and conversations about stock portfolios and vacation homes in the Hamptons. But out here, surrounded by his mother's rose garden, he could almost remember what it felt like to be human. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" The voice came from somewhere near the fountain, soft and warm like honey over biscuits. James turned, expecting to see another guest who'd followed him outside with romance on her mind. Instead, he saw a woman he'd never seen before, kneeling beside the fountain with a small watering can in her hands. She was tending to the flowers that had been arranged around the base, her movements gentle and careful. The garden lights caught the rich brown of her skin and made it glow like she'd been touched by starlight. "You're not supposed to be out here during the party," James said, his automatic coldness kicking in. "The staff should remain in the kitchen until the guests leave."
If you have stuck with this story up to this moment, please take a second to support the channel by subscribing and sharing the story. Your support helps us to share heartwarming stories like this one. Thank you. Now back to the story.
She looked up at him then, and James felt something strange happen in his chest, like a door he'd welded shut suddenly creaking open. Her eyes were the deepest brown he'd ever seen, warm and intelligent and completely unafraid. Most people looked at him like he was either a threat or a trophy. She looked at him like he was just a man standing in a garden. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. I know I shouldn't be out here." She stood slowly, still holding the watering can. "It's just, these flowers were looking a little thirsty, and I couldn't stand watching them droop during such a beautiful party. Your mother must have loved roses. There are at least 12 different varieties here." James felt like he'd been sucker punched. No one talked about his mother anymore. His friends and business associates had learned years ago that the subject was off limits, buried under layers of silence and changed conversations. But this woman, this maid he'd never met, had looked at his mother's garden and seen love. "How did you know they were my mother's?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "The way they're arranged. It's not formal like a landscaper would do it. It's personal. Like someone planted each one with a story in mind." She gestured to a climbing rose that wrapped around a small trellis. "This one's positioned so you can see it from the breakfast room window. And that pink one over there catches the morning sun perfectly. Someone who really loved this place designed this garden." James stared at her. In 5 years, hundreds of people had walked through this garden. Business partners, society friends, staff members, potential romantic interests his friends kept pushing at him. Not one of them had noticed what this woman had seen in 5 minutes. "You're the new maid." It wasn't a question. He should have known immediately. The simple black dress, the practical shoes, the fact that she was working while everyone else was drinking champagne and pretending to care about charity. Amara Johnson. She shifted the watering can to her left hand and extended her right. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Mitchell." He looked down at her outstretched hand like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. When was the last time someone had offered to shake his hand without wanting something from him? When was the last time someone had introduced themselves like they actually wanted to know who he was? Slowly, almost against his better judgment, he reached out and took her hand. The moment their skin touched, James felt like he'd grabbed hold of a live wire. Her hand was warm and slightly rough from work, real in a way that made him realize how long it had been since he'd touched anything that wasn't cold and polished and perfect. She had a firm handshake, confident without trying to prove anything, and she looked him straight in the eyes while they shook hands like she had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. "You should get back inside," he said, but he didn't let go of her hand right away. "Before someone notices you're missing." "You're probably right." But she didn't move either. It's so peaceful out here. All that noise and chatter inside. Sometimes it's nice to be somewhere quiet with something real." Something real. When was the last time anyone had used that word to describe anything in his life? "The flowers aren't going anywhere," James said, though he wasn't sure why he was prolonging this conversation. "They'll survive until tomorrow." Amara smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night of winter. "I suppose you're right. But sometimes the small things that seem like they can wait are the ones that need attention the most." She wasn't talking about flowers anymore. James knew it, and she knew he knew it, and the knowledge hung between them like a secret neither of them was ready to speak out loud. "I should let you get back to your guests," she said, finally stepping back. "I'm sure there are important people in there wondering where you went." Important people. James almost laughed, but it would have come out bitter. Right. Important people with important things to say about their important lives. "You don't sound like you're enjoying your own party very much." The observation was gentle, but it hit him like a slap. How long had it been since someone had asked him, even indirectly, how he was feeling? How long since anyone had cared if he was enjoying anything? "I don't enjoy much of anything anymore," he heard himself say, and immediately regretted it. He didn't share personal information. He didn't open doors, even tiny ones, for people to walk through. But something about this woman made him forget his own rules. "That sounds lonely," she said simply. And just like that, she'd put her finger on the thing he'd been running from for 5 years. Lonely. He was surrounded by people every day. Employees, business partners, acquaintances who called themselves friends. His calendar was full from morning to night with meetings and calls and social obligations. But lonely? God, yes. He was the loneliest man in the world. "I should go," he said, taking a step backward toward the house. This conversation was dangerous. This woman was dangerous, with her warm eyes and her gentle questions and her ability to see things that no one else saw. "Of course. I hope the rest of your evening goes well, Mr. Mitchell." "James," he said, and then immediately wondered why. "You can. When we're not around other people, you can call me James." Her smile got brighter, like he'd just given her a gift instead of just his first name. "Thank you, James. That's very kind." Kind. Another word that hadn't been used to describe him in years. He walked back toward the house, but before he reached the French doors that led to the terrace, he turned around. She was kneeling by the fountain again, back to tending the flowers with the same gentle care she'd shown before. Like their conversation had been perfectly normal, like she hadn't just reached into his chest and rearranged everything he thought he knew about himself. "Amara," he called softly. She looked up. "Thank you. For taking care of them. The roses. My mother would have. She would have appreciated it." "I know she would have," Amara said. "Anyone who could create something this beautiful must have had a heart full of love." James nodded and went back inside, but everything felt different now. The conversation seemed more meaningless, the laughter more hollow, the whole glittering scene more like a performance he was tired of giving. He moved through the rest of the evening like a man sleepwalking, shaking hands and making small talk and writing checks, but his mind kept drifting back to the garden, to warm brown eyes and gentle hands and a voice that had called him lonely like it was something that could be fixed. Later that night, after the last guest had gone home and the catering staff had cleaned up and the house had settled back into its usual silence, James found himself standing at his bedroom window looking down at the garden. He could see the fountain from here, and the roses his mother had planted with such hope and joy. For the first time in 5 years, the garden didn't look empty. It looked like it was waiting for something. Or someone. 3 floors below, in her small room near the kitchen, Amara was lying awake thinking about brown eyes that held too much sadness and a handshake that had felt like coming home. She'd worked for wealthy people before, but she'd never met one who seemed so lost inside his own life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "How's the new job, sis? Are you living in a palace yet?" She typed back, "Something like that. But I think the prince might need saving more than I do." She stared at that message for a long time before hitting send, wondering if she'd just committed herself to something that would change everything. Outside her window, the roses swayed in the gentle night breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a lonely man was learning what it felt like to remember his own heart. What would you do if you started falling for someone you knew you could never be with? Have you ever been in a situation where your heart wanted something your mind said was impossible? Share your thoughts below. The next morning, James Mitchell woke up thinking about roses. This was a problem. James Mitchell didn't think about flowers when he woke up. He thought about stock prices and merger deals and the 17 different ways his competitors were trying to steal his clients. He thought about numbers and strategies and cold, logical things that made sense in the harsh light of day. He definitely didn't think about the way a woman's eyes had sparkled in the garden lights, or how her laugh had sounded like music he'd forgotten he used to love. Get it together, he muttered to himself as he pulled on his running clothes. A good 5-mile run would clear his head, get him back to normal. He'd been working too hard lately, that was all. His mind was playing tricks on him, making him think a simple conversation with the help was something more than it was. But when he jogged past the fountain on his usual route through the grounds, he slowed down without meaning to. The roses looked different in the morning light, more vibrant somehow. And there, kneeling beside the flower bed with that same gentle care, was Amara. She was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt instead of her uniform, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that bounced as she worked. She had a small radio beside her playing something soft and soulful, and she was humming along under her breath. She looked happy. When was the last time James had seen someone look genuinely happy just to be where they were? "You're up early," he said, stopping his jog entirely. She looked up, startled, and he realized she hadn't heard him coming over the music. For just a second, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest feel tight. "Good morning, James. I hope it's okay that I'm out here. I wanted to get some work done before it got too hot." She gestured to the flower beds around her. "These beauties need a lot of attention, and I figured early morning was better than during your work hours." She'd remembered that he'd told her to use his first name. Something about that small detail made him feel strangely warm. "It's fine," he said, then found himself adding, "What are you listening to?" "Oh, just some old-school R&B. Helps make the work go faster." She reached over to turn down the volume. "I can turn it off if it's bothering you." "No, don't." The words came out faster than he intended. It's nice. The garden's been too quiet for too long." They looked at each other for a moment, and James felt that same electric current from the night before. This was dangerous territory. He knew it, she probably knew it too. But he couldn't seem to make himself walk away. "I should let you get back to your run," Amara said, but she didn't look away. "Right. My run." He took a step backward, then stopped. "Amara." "Yes. If you need anything for the garden, tools, supplies, whatever, just ask Carol. Don't worry about the budget." Her smile could have powered the whole house. "Thank you. That means a lot." James nodded and forced himself to start running again, but he could feel her watching him go. And God help him, he liked it. Over the next few days, James found himself taking longer routes through the house. Routes that happened to pass by wherever Amara was working. He told himself he was just checking on things, making sure she was doing her job properly. But the truth was more complicated than that. She was doing her job perfectly. Better than perfectly, actually. The house had never looked so alive. She didn't just clean, she paid attention. She moved his father's favorite books back to where they used to sit on the desk. She made sure the family photos that had gotten pushed to the back of shelves found their way to the front again. She filled vases with flowers from the garden and placed them in spots where they caught the morning light just right. It was like she was bringing his home back to life, one small gesture at a time. "The new girl's working out well," Carol mentioned during one of their weekly check-ins. "She's very thorough, and she has good instincts about what needs attention." "Good," James said, trying to sound casual. "Any complaints? Problems?" "None at all. She's pleasant with the other staff, professional, punctual. And Mr. Mitchell." Carol's voice took on a slightly knowing tone. She's been asking questions about your parents. About what they were like, what they enjoyed. Says she wants to make sure she's taking proper care of their things. James felt something twist in his chest. No one asked about his parents anymore. No one wanted to hear stories about his father's terrible jokes or his mother's obsession with old movies. The world had moved on, expected him to move on too. But Amara wanted to know about them like they still mattered. What kind of questions? He heard himself ask. Oh, things like what kind of music your mother liked, whether your father had a favorite room in the house. She noticed that piano in the music room hasn't been touched in years and asked if anyone in the family played. Carol paused. I told her your mother used to play every evening after dinner. Beautiful music. She had such gentle hands. James's throat felt tight. He could still see his mother at that piano, her fingers dancing over the keys while she played everything from classical pieces to jazz standards to silly songs she'd make up just to make him laugh. The piano had been silent since the accident, covered with a dust cloth like a tomb. Sir, are you all right? Fine, James managed. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. He was starting to remember things he'd buried, feel things he'd frozen, want things he'd given up on. And it was all because of a woman who saw his life more clearly than he did. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon when James came home early from a meeting that had been canceled at the last minute. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in years. He could hear soft music coming from somewhere upstairs. Not a radio this time, but something richer and more complex. Piano music. His feet carried him toward the sound before his brain could stop them. He climbed the stairs like a man in a dream, following the melody that wrapped around his heart and squeezed tight. The music room door was open, and there, sitting at his mother's piano with her back to him, was Amara. She was playing something beautiful and complicated, something that required real skill and years of practice. Her hands moved over the keys with the same gentle confidence she brought to everything else, and the music that poured out was like sunlight after rain, bright and warm and full of hope. James stood in the doorway, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. It had been so long since this room had held music instead of silence. So long since the piano had been anything more than a piece of furniture covered in memories he couldn't bear to touch. The song ended, and Amara's hands stilled on the keys. She sat there for a moment in the quiet, and James thought he saw her shoulders tremble slightly. That was beautiful, he said softly. She spun around on the bench, her eyes wide with what looked like panic. James, I'm so sorry. I know I shouldn't be in here, shouldn't be touching anything. I was just... The piano looked so lonely and I thought maybe... Where did you learn to play like that? He asked, stepping into the room. She looked down at her hands, still resting on the keys. My grandmother taught me when I was little. She said music was medicine for the soul, that it could heal things that words couldn't reach. She took a shaky breath. I'm sorry. I know this must be your mother's piano, and I had no right. She would have loved hearing you play, James said, his voice rough with emotion. She always said this room was meant to be filled with music, not silence. Amara looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. Carol told me she used to play every evening. This house must have been so full of life then. It was. He moved closer to the piano, running his fingers along the polished wood. She played everything, classical, jazz, blues, whatever struck her fancy. Sometimes she'd make up songs and sing them while she cooked dinner. Terrible songs with ridiculous lyrics that made my father and me laugh until our sides hurt. She sounds wonderful, Amara whispered. She was. They both were. James felt the familiar ache in his chest, but this time it wasn't just pain. There was something else mixed in, warmth, maybe. Or gratitude. I haven't heard music in this room since the accident, Amara finished gently. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Would you like me to play something else? Something your mother might have liked. James looked at her sitting there at his mother's piano, offering to fill the silence he'd been living in for 5 years, offering to bring life back into a room that had become a mausoleum. Part of him wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But another part of him, the part that had learned it was safer to feel nothing, wanted to run. I should let you get back to your work, he said instead. Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded and started to close the piano lid. Of course. I'm sorry I overstepped. Amara. He reached out and caught her hand before she could stand up, stopping her from closing the piano. Her skin was warm under his fingers, real and alive and steady. You didn't overstep. It's just complicated, she said softly. Yeah, complicated. They were sitting close now, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could smell the light perfume she wore that reminded him of vanilla and sunshine. Close enough that if he leaned forward just a little bit, he could kiss her. The thought hit him like lightning, sudden and electric and impossible to ignore. He wanted to kiss her. Wanted it so badly that his hand tightened around hers without his permission. James, she whispered, and her voice was breathless, uncertain. He was leaning closer, she was leaning closer, and the space between them was disappearing like morning mist. Her eyes were on his lips, his were on hers, and the whole world had narrowed down to this moment, this choice, this. The sound of Carol's heels clicking on the marble floor downstairs shattered the spell like glass hitting concrete. They sprang apart, both breathing hard, both staring at each other with a mixture of desire and panic. What had they almost done? What were they thinking? I should go, Amara said, standing up quickly. Too quickly. She swayed a little, like the almost kiss had left her dizzy. Amara, wait. But she was already hurrying past him, already running away from whatever had just happened between them. At the doorway, she turned back. Your mother's piano shouldn't stay silent forever, she said. Music is meant to be shared. She would want this room to be happy again. And then she was gone, leaving James alone with the piano and the lingering scent of vanilla and the knowledge that he was in trouble. Deep, complicated, impossible trouble. Because he was falling for his maid. And she might be falling for him too. That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the way Amara's hands had looked on the piano keys, the way her voice had sounded when she whispered his name, the way the world had felt like it was spinning when they'd almost kissed. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid for 5 years. Feeling something. Wanting someone. Opening himself up to the kind of pain that came when you let people matter to you. But Amara Johnson was making it impossible to stay frozen. She was warmth and music and life, and she was melting through his defenses like spring sunshine through ice. The question was, what was he going to do about it? 3 floors below, Amara was lying awake too, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened in the music room. She'd almost kissed her boss. Her billionaire boss who lived in a different world than she did, who could fire her with a word and destroy any chance she had of helping Marcus get through college. But when he'd looked at her like that, when his hand had covered hers on the piano bench, all of that had seemed less important than the sadness in his eyes and the way he'd talked about his mother and the feeling that they understood each other in ways that had nothing to do with money or jobs or all the reasons why this could never work. Get it together, Amara, she whispered to herself. He's grieving and lonely and you're convenient. Don't make this into something it's not. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't that simple. The way he'd looked at her hadn't been about convenience. It had been about connection, about 2 people recognizing something in each other that they'd both been missing. The problem was, some connections were too dangerous to explore. And some were too powerful to ignore. Have you ever had to choose between playing it safe and taking the biggest risk of your life? Sometimes the scariest leap is the one that leads to exactly where you're supposed to be. What would you choose? The crisis started with a phone call at 6 in the morning. James was already awake, standing in his home office with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he stared out at the garden. He'd been doing a lot of that lately, standing at windows, looking for glimpses of Amara as she moved through her daily routine. It was pathetic, really. A grown man reduced to watching for a woman like a teenager with his first crush. The phone rang, and he grabbed it without looking at the caller ID, grateful for any distraction from his thoughts. James. Oh God, James, something terrible has happened. It was his Aunt Patricia, his mother's sister, and she was crying. James felt his blood turn to ice water. Patricia never cried. She was the practical one, the strong one, the one who'd helped him handle all the funeral arrangements when he'd been too destroyed to think straight. What's wrong? What happened? It's the foundation, James. The charity foundation your parents started. Someone's been stealing from it. Embezzling funds for months, maybe years. The board called an emergency meeting, and the numbers. Oh honey, it's bad. Really bad. James sank into his desk chair, feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. His parents had started the Children's Hope Foundation 15 years ago, pouring their hearts and a significant chunk of their fortune into helping kids who'd aged out of foster care get college educations and job training. It had been their passion project, their legacy, the thing they'd been most proud of besides him. How much? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Almost $2 million. And there's more. Whoever did this was smart about it. They made it look like the money was going to administrative costs and program expenses. The books looked clean on the surface. Who did this? Patricia's voice was bitter. Richard Blackstone. Your father's old business partner. The one who's been managing the foundation's investments. James closed his eyes. Richard Blackstone had been like a second father to him growing up. He'd been the one to deliver the eulogy at his parents' funeral, the one who'd promised to help James carry on their legacy. And now, there's going to be an investigation, Patricia continued. The FBI, the IRS, everyone. And James. If we can't replace that money fast, the foundation is going to collapse. All those kids who were counting on scholarships for next year. I'll cover it, James said immediately. Whatever we need. I'll transfer the funds today. It's not just about the money, honey, though God bless you for offering. The scandal is going to destroy everything your parents built. The donors are going to run, the board members are talking about resigning, and the media. She took a shaky breath. Channel 7 already called asking for a statement. James felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. His parents' life work, the thing they'd cared about more than anything except him, was about to become a public disaster. Their names were going to be dragged through the mud. Their legacy turned into a cautionary tale about trust and betrayal. I have to go, he told Patricia. I need to call my lawyers, figure out damage control. James, wait. There's something else. The emergency board meeting is tonight at 7. We need you there. You're the only one left who can speak for what your parents really wanted, who can maybe convince people not to abandon ship entirely. Tonight, 7 o'clock. The same time as the monthly staff meeting that Carol always held in the main dining room. Which meant, James shook his head. It didn't matter. This was bigger than household logistics. I'll be there, he promised. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and meetings and legal consultations. James threw himself into crisis management mode, the same cold, calculating mindset that had made him successful in business. He could compartmentalize, focus, push aside any emotion that might interfere with getting things done. But by late afternoon, the walls he'd built around his feelings were starting to crack. He was in his home office, reviewing financial documents with his lawyer, when he heard piano music drifting up from downstairs. Soft, gentle music that wrapped around his heart and squeezed tight. Amara was playing again, probably during her break, probably trying to bring a little beauty into a day that felt like it was falling apart. Mr. Mitchell, did you hear what I said about the media strategy? James blinked, realizing he'd completely lost track of the conversation. Sorry. What? I said we need to get ahead of this story. If we can position you as the grieving son who's working tirelessly to preserve his parents' legacy, who's personally replacing the stolen funds. No. The word came out harder than James intended. I'm not using my parents' death to spin this into a PR win. That's not what they would have wanted. His lawyer looked frustrated. James, you need to think strategically here. Your reputation, your business interests. I don't care about my reputation. James exploded, surprising himself with the force of his anger. Those kids who were counting on scholarships don't care about my reputation. The families who needed help don't care about my business interests. This isn't about me. The lawyer held up his hands. Okay. We'll figure out another approach. But James was already standing up, already moving toward the door. He needed air. He needed space. He needed to talk to someone who understood that some things mattered more than money and power and protecting yourself from getting hurt. He found Amara in the kitchen, helping Cook prepare dinner for the staff meeting. She was laughing at something Cook had said. Her whole face lit up with genuine joy, and for a moment James just stood in the doorway watching her. How did she do it? How did she stay so warm and open and full of life when the world kept throwing punches? Mr. Mitchell. Cook looked flustered to see him in her domain. Is there something you need? I can have someone bring you whatever. It's fine, Cook. I just need to speak with Amara for a moment. He looked at her, and something in his expression must have given away how close to breaking he was, because her smile faded into concern. Of course. Amara, why don't you take a few minutes? Amara wiped her hands on her apron and followed him out of the kitchen. They walked in silence until they reached the music room, the place where they'd almost kissed, where everything had started to change between them. What's wrong? She asked as soon as they were alone. You look like someone died. Someone did. A long time ago. And now they're about to die all over again. James ran his hands through his hair, feeling the careful control he'd maintained all day starting to slip. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be bothering you with this. You have work to do. James. She reached out and touched his arm, and the simple contact made him feel steadier than he had all day. Talk to me. What happened? So he told her. Everything. About Richard's betrayal, about the foundation's collapse, about the kids who were going to lose their scholarships and the legacy that was about to be destroyed. The words poured out of him like water through a broken dam, and Amara listened to all of it without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just being present in the way that only she knew how to be. I don't know what to do, he admitted when he was finished. I can replace the money, but I can't replace the trust. I can't undo the damage to their reputation. Everything they worked for, everything they believed in, is still true, Amara said firmly. One person's greed doesn't erase 15 years of good work. One betrayal doesn't cancel out all the lives they changed. The board doesn't see it that way. Half of them want to shut down the foundation entirely rather than deal with the scandal. Then you fight for it. She said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You stand up in that meeting tonight and you remind them why your parents started this foundation in the first place. You tell them about the kids who are counting on those scholarships, about the good that still needs to be done. I'm not good at that kind of thing. Inspirational speeches, getting people to believe in something. James shook his head. I'm good at numbers and deals and making money. But making people care. Making them see past the scandal to what really matters? I don't know how to do that. Amara was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Then she walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench. Your mother used to play every evening after dinner, she said, her fingers finding the keys. Carol told me she'd play whatever she was feeling. Happy songs when things were good, sad songs when she needed to grieve, hopeful songs when she was dreaming about the future. The melody that filled the room was one James recognized. An old jazz standard his mother had loved, Something About the Way You Look Tonight. But Amara played it slower, more contemplatively, like she was searching for something in the music. She started the foundation because she believed every child deserved a chance to become who they were meant to be, Amara continued, still playing. Not because it was good business or good publicity, but because she remembered what it felt like to be young and scared and need someone to believe in you. How do you know that? James asked. Because that's what you told me that first night in the garden. You said she would have appreciated someone taking care of her roses because she had a heart full of love. Amara's hands stilled on the keys, and she looked at him. That kind of love doesn't die because someone steals money. It doesn't disappear because people get scared or because the newspapers write ugly stories. James felt something shifting inside his chest, like ice beginning to crack and melt. But how do I make them see that? You don't make them see anything. You just tell the truth. You tell them what your parents would want you to do if they were here right now. She stood up from the piano and walked over to him. And you remember that you're not alone in this fight. Amara. I know I'm just the maid, she said quickly. I know I don't belong in your boardrooms or your charity meetings or your world. But those kids you're talking about? I was one of those kids. I aged out of foster care when I was 18 with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a dream of going to college that seemed impossible until someone gave me a chance. James stared at her, pieces of her story clicking into place. The way she'd talked about helping her brother get an education. The way she'd worked multiple jobs, saved every penny. The way she understood what it meant to need someone to believe in you. The foundation helped you, he said. A program like it did. Not your parents' foundation specifically, but something similar. Someone who believed that kids like me deserved a shot. Tears were shining in her eyes. So when you stand up in that meeting tonight, you remember that it's not about money or scandals or protecting reputations. It's about 18-year-old kids who are scared and alone and need someone to tell them they matter. Without thinking, without calculating the risks or considering the consequences, James reached out and cupped her face in his hands. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks, and he wanted to kiss them away, wanted to hold her until the sadness passed. How are you so brave? He whispered. How do you keep believing in good things when the world keeps letting you down? Because giving up is scarier than getting hurt, she whispered back. And because some things are too important to lose without a fight. They were standing so close now that he could count her eyelashes, could feel her breath warm against his skin. This was the moment from the piano bench all over again, except this time there was no one coming up the stairs, no interruption to break the spell. Amara, he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. I know this is complicated, she said, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. I know all the reasons why this is a terrible idea. So many reasons, he agreed, but he was leaning closer, drawn to her like gravity. You're my boss. I'm your employee. We're from completely different worlds. I don't care, James said and realized he meant it. I don't care about any of that. You should care. We both should care. Probably, he said, and then he kissed her. The moment their lips met, James felt like he'd been holding his breath for 5 years and could finally breathe again. She tasted like hope and sunshine and everything he'd convinced himself he didn't need. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and he deepened the kiss, pouring 5 years of loneliness and grief and carefully buried love into the space between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words coming out raw and honest and terrifying. "I didn't want to, I tried not to, but I'm falling in love with you and I don't know what to do about it." "James." She started, but he pressed on. "I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know I'm your boss and you need this job and there are 1,000 reasons why this could never work. But when I'm with you, I remember who I used to be before everything fell apart. When I'm with you, I want to be better than I am." "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, and his heart stopped completely. "But James, even if we figure out the job situation, even if we can get past all the practical problems, you're still grieving. You're still healing. How do I know you won't wake up tomorrow and decide I was just a distraction from your pain?" It was a fair question. A necessary question. And James knew there was only one way to answer it. "Come with me tonight," he said. "To the board meeting. Not as my employee, not as my maid, but as someone who cares about what my parents built. Someone who understands what's at stake better than anyone else in that room." "James, I can't. I don't belong there." "You belong there more than anyone," he said fiercely. "You're exactly who my parents would want standing up for their foundation. You're who they were trying to help." She was quiet for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, weighing the risks and possibilities. "If I do this," she said finally, "if I walk into that room with you tonight, everything changes. There's no going back to the way things were." "I don't want to go back," James said. "I want to go forward. With you. Even if it means people will talk. Even if it means your business associates and society friends will whisper about the billionaire who fell for his maid." "Let them talk," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Let them whisper. I'd rather have you and their judgment than their approval and an empty life." Amara smiled through her tears, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of winter. "Okay," she said. "Okay, yes. I'll come with you tonight." James kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and possibility and the terrifying, wonderful knowledge that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict or control. For the first time in 5 years, that didn't scare him. It felt like coming home. Have you ever seen love change someone completely for the better? Sometimes the right person doesn't just love you as you are. They inspire you to become who you were always meant to be. Tell me about a time love transformed your life. The boardroom at the Children's Hope Foundation felt like a courtroom when James and Amara walked in at 7 o'clock that evening. 12 faces turned toward them, and James could see the confusion and surprise ripple through the room as they took in the sight of him arriving with a young black woman they'd never seen before. Patricia was there, of course, looking older than her 62 years. Richard Blackstone sat at the far end of the table, his face a mask of shame and defiance. The other board members, a mix of society wives, retired businessmen, and non-profit veterans, all wore expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed judgment. "James," Patricia said, standing to embrace him. "Thank you for coming." "And who is?" "This is Amara Johnson," James said, his hand finding the small of Amara's back in a gesture of support. "She's here because she understands better than anyone in this room what this foundation really means." "I'm sorry," said Margaret Whitfield, the board secretary and a woman who'd never worked a day in her life but somehow felt qualified to judge everyone who had. "But this is a closed board meeting. We can't have outsiders." "She's not an outsider," James said, his voice carrying the steel that had made him successful in business. "She's someone who benefited from a program exactly like the one we're about to destroy because we're more worried about our reputations than the kids we're supposed to be helping." The room fell silent. Richard Blackstone looked up from his hands for the first time since they'd arrived, his eyes narrowing as he studied Amara. "James," Patricia said gently, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No. James pulled out a chair for Amara, then sat down beside her. Whatever we're going to say, we say it here now with everyone present, including her. Especially her. Thomas Hartwell, the board chairman, cleared his throat. He was a decent man, James knew, but someone who'd spent his whole life in boardrooms where image mattered more than impact. Very well. Let's begin. He shuffled his papers, clearly uncomfortable. As you all know, we've discovered significant financial irregularities in the Foundation's accounts. Richard has admitted to embezzling nearly $2 million over the past 3 years. A murmur went around the table. Even though they all knew why they were there, hearing it stated so bluntly was still shocking. The question before us tonight, Hartwell continued, is whether the Foundation can survive this scandal. Several major donors have already indicated they'll be withdrawing their support. The media attention has been significant. And frankly, the board is divided on whether it's worth trying to rebuild trust or whether we should dissolve the Foundation entirely and donate the remaining assets to other children's charities. Dissolve it. James felt Amara tense beside him. You want to throw away 15 years of work because one person made bad choices? It's not that simple, James, said Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a woman James had always respected for her no-nonsense approach to non-profit work. The damage to our reputation is severe. Parents are calling asking if their children's college funds are safe. Donors are questioning whether their money is being used properly. The trust that took decades to build has been shattered. So we rebuild it, James said. We implement new oversight procedures, we bring in independent auditors, we do whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again. With what money? Margaret asked sharply. Even if you're willing to replace the stolen funds, which is generous, we still need operating capital. We need donor confidence. We need people who believe in what we're doing. We have that, Amara said quietly. Every head in the room turned toward her. She was sitting up straight, her hands folded calmly on the table, but James could see the slight tremor in her fingers that told him how nervous she was. I'm sorry, miss. Dr. Chen prompted. Johnson. Amara Johnson. She took a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was stronger. And you have people who believe in what you're doing. You just can't see them from here. What do you mean? Hartwell asked. Amara looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes in turn. How many of you have ever been 18 years old with nowhere to go and no one to turn to? Silence. How many of you have ever had to choose between buying groceries and buying textbooks? How many of you have ever slept in your car because you couldn't afford both rent and tuition? More silence, but James could see some of the board members shifting uncomfortably. I have, Amara continued. I aged out of foster care when I was 18 with a garbage bag full of clothes and a dream that seemed impossible. I wanted to go to college, but I had no money, no family support, no credit history to get loans. I was working 3 jobs just to afford a tiny apartment and ramen noodles for dinner. James watched Richard Blackstone's face during this speech. The man was actually listening, maybe for the first time in years. A foundation like this one gave me a chance, Amara said. Not just the money for tuition but mentorship, support, someone who believed I could make something of myself. That foundation changed my life, and through me, it's changing my little brother's life too, because he's going to college next year, partly because I can help him now. She leaned forward, her passion evident in every word. So when you ask who believes in what you're doing, the answer is, every kid who's aging out of foster care right now. Every teenager who's working 2 jobs and still can't afford college. Every young person who just needs someone to say, you matter, and your dreams are worth investing in. The room was completely quiet now. Even Margaret looked moved, her usual judgmental expression replaced by something softer. But here's the thing, Amara continued, her voice getting stronger. Those kids don't care about your reputation. They don't care about newspaper articles or donor confidence or whatever society people are saying at their cocktail parties. They care about opportunity. They care about hope. And right now, you're talking about taking that away from them because you're embarrassed. That's not fair, Dr. Chen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Amara asked. You're in this room debating whether to close down a foundation that changes lives because one person stole money. But have you asked yourselves what James's parents would want you to do? She turned to look at James, and he saw the love and support in her eyes give him the strength to speak. They'd want us to fight, he said, his voice rough with emotion. They'd want us to find a way to keep helping kids, no matter how hard it gets. My mother used to say that doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. If it was, everyone would do it. That's beautiful sentiment, Margaret said. But we still have practical problems. Oversight, funding, public trust. Then we solve them, James said firmly. I'll personally fund an independent audit of every transaction from the past 5 years. I'll match every dollar donated to the foundation for the next 3 years. And I'll put my own reputation on the line to vouch for the new leadership structure we implement. James, Patricia said gently, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure you want to tie yourself so closely to the scandal? Your business interests. My business interests don't matter more than those kids, James said, and as he spoke the words, he realized how completely he meant them. This foundation was my parents' legacy. It's going to be my legacy too. And I'm not walking away from it because things got complicated. Hartwell was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers in front of him. If we move forward, we'll need new leadership. Richard obviously has to step down from all roles. I'll do it, James said immediately. I'll take over as executive director, work with the foundation full-time instead of just writing checks from the sidelines. James, Dr. Chen said carefully, running a non-profit isn't like running a business. It requires different skills, different approaches. Then I'll learn, he said. And I'll hire people who know what they're doing to help me. He looked at Amara. People who understand what we're really trying to accomplish. The implication was clear, and James saw several board members exchange glances. Are you suggesting Miss Johnson for a position with the foundation? Hartwell asked. I'm saying that anyone who's lived the experience we're trying to address should have a voice in how we address it, James replied. Whether that's Amara or other people with similar backgrounds. We've been making decisions about these kids without including anyone who actually understands what they're going through. Richard Blackstone suddenly spoke up for the first time since the meeting began. She's right, you know. His voice was hoarse, broken. Miss Johnson is right. We got so caught up in galas and donor events and making the rich people feel good about their tax-deductible contributions that we forgot about the actual kids. He looked directly at Amara. I stole that money because I felt entitled to it. Because I'd convinced myself that I was so important to the foundation's success that I deserved to be compensated beyond my salary. But listening to you, God, I haven't thought about the actual beneficiaries in years. I forgot they were real people with real dreams. Tears were running down his cheeks now. I can't undo what I did. I can't give back those years or that trust. But maybe if you can find a way to save this foundation, it can be better than it was before. More honest. More connected to the people it's supposed to serve. The room was silent except for the sound of Richard's quiet crying. Finally, Hartwell spoke. All in favor of continuing the foundation with James as executive director and a commitment to implementing new oversight and beneficiary involvement procedures? One by one, hands went up around the table. Even Margaret, after a long moment of consideration, raised her hand. Motion carries, Hartwell said. The Children's Hope Foundation will continue operations. James felt like he could breathe for the first time in hours. But more than that, he felt proud. Proud of what they'd accomplished, proud of the fight they'd fought, and incredibly proud of the woman sitting beside him who'd helped save his parents' legacy. "There's one more thing," he said, standing up and reaching for Amara's hand. "I need you all to know that Amara and we're together. Romantically. I know that might complicate things, and I know some of you might have opinions about it, but I wanted to be transparent." The silence that followed was deafening. James could practically hear the mental calculations happening around the table. The billionaire and his maid, the scandal potential, the gossip that would follow. It was Patricia who spoke first. "Is she good for you, James?" The question was so simple, so direct that it caught him off guard. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "She makes me want to be the man my parents raised me to be." Patricia smiled. "Then that's all that matters. Your parents would have loved her." Dr. Chen nodded. "If Miss Johnson is willing to consider a position with the foundation, I think she'd bring valuable perspective to our work." "I'd be honored," Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. As the meeting wrapped up and board members filed out, James and Amara found themselves alone in the room with Patricia. "I'm proud of you both," she said, embracing them each in turn. "You fought for something that mattered and you won. Your parents would be so proud." Later that night, they sat together on the terrace overlooking the garden where they'd first met. The roses were blooming in the moonlight, and soft music drifted from the house where James had asked the staff to celebrate their victory with dinner and drinks. "So," Amara said, curled up against his side on the outdoor sofa, "what happens now? With us, I mean. With this crazy, impossible thing we've gotten ourselves into." James tightened his arms around her. "Now we figure it out as we go. You'll transition from housekeeping to working with the foundation. We'll deal with the gossip and the judgment and all the people who think they know better than we do about what makes us happy. And when the media finds out, when the society pages start calling you the billionaire who fell for his maid, then I'll tell them the truth," James said simply. "That I'm the luckiest man alive because I found someone who saw through all my walls and loved me anyway. Someone who saved my parents' legacy and helped me remember who I was supposed to be." Amara tilted her head up to look at him. "You know this isn't going to be easy, right? There are going to be people who think I'm only with you for your money. People who think you're going through some kind of crisis." "Let them think whatever they want," James said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I know the truth. You know the truth. And anyone who matters will figure it out eventually. What if your business suffers? What if your friends decide they can't handle your scandalous choice in women? Then they weren't really my friends to begin with," he said. "And as for business, I think I'm about to be too busy running a foundation to worry about what the country club crowd thinks of my love life." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds and feeling the peace that comes after a battle well fought. "James," Amara said eventually, "Thank you. For tonight, for everything. For seeing me as more than just someone who works for you. Thank you for being brave enough to walk into that boardroom. Thank you for saving something that mattered to people who can't even thank you for it. Thank you for bringing music back into my house and life back into my heart." She turned in his arms and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "So what do we do tomorrow? How do we start this new life we've just created?" "Tomorrow," James said, "we wake up together. We have breakfast in the garden while you tell me more about your ideas for the foundation. We start planning how to help kids who need what you needed when you were 18. And then, if you're willing, yes, then we go shopping for an engagement ring." Amara's eyes went wide. "James Mitchell, are you proposing to me?" "Not yet," he said, grinning. "But I'm giving you fair warning that it's coming. Probably sooner than you think." Because I've spent 5 years being alone, and now that I've found you, I don't want to waste another day pretending we have forever to figure this out." "You're crazy," she said, but she was laughing, tears streaming down her face. "Crazy about you," he agreed. "Crazy enough to change my whole life for you. Crazy enough to fight for us against anyone who thinks we don't make sense together." "Good," she said, settling back into his arms. "Because I'm crazy about you too. Crazy enough to believe that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that seem impossible at first." As they sat there in the garden, surrounded by his mother's roses and the promise of tomorrow, James thought about how much his life had changed in just a few weeks. He'd gone from being a man who trusted no one and needed nothing to someone who was ready to build a future with a woman who'd shown him that love was worth the risk. The foundation would thrive under their leadership. The kids who needed help would get it. And he and Amara would face whatever challenges came their way together, proving that sometimes the most unlikely love stories turn out to be the most beautiful ones. In the distance, a clock chimed midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. But for James and Amara, it felt like the beginning of everything. The wedding was small, held in the garden where they'd first met, with roses blooming everywhere and soft jazz playing on speakers hidden among the flowers. Marcus walked Amara down the aisle, tears streaming down his face as he prepared to give his sister to the man who'd helped make his medical school dreams come true. The Children's Hope Foundation had just completed its most successful year ever, helping over 200 young people transition from foster care to independence. Amara had become not just the program coordinator but the heart of the organization, bringing a perspective and passion that transformed how they approached their work. As James watched his bride walk toward him, radiant in a simple white dress she'd chosen because it reminded her of the outfit she'd been wearing that first night in the garden, he thought about all the reasons people had given them for why their relationship would never work. Different backgrounds. Different worlds. The scandal of a billionaire marrying his former employee. But love, James had learned, didn't care about any of that. Love saw a man who needed healing and a woman who knew how to help him find it. Love saw a woman who deserved to be cherished and a man who was grateful for the chance to do it. Love saw two hearts that recognized each other across all the distances that were supposed to keep them apart. When Amara reached him at the altar, she whispered, "No regrets." "Only one," he whispered back. Her face fell slightly. "What?" "That it took me so long to find you." Her smile could have powered the whole city. "Well," she said, "we've got the rest of our lives to make up for lost time." As they exchanged vows in front of the people who mattered most to them, promising to love and cherish and support each other through whatever came next, James knew that his parents would have been proud, not just of the foundation they'd saved, but of the love they'd found in the process. Sometimes the best things in life come disguised as interruptions, complications, or impossible dreams. Sometimes the person who changes your whole world walks into your life wearing an apron and carrying a watering can, ready to tend the parts of your heart you thought had died. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you're brave enough to let them. What's the most unexpected place you've found love, or seen it bloom? Sometimes the most beautiful love stories start in the most ordinary moments. Share your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing about real-life romance.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.